Welcome to TAMA Talks, brought to you by the Torrance Art Museum Advocates. I'm Janine Madden, current TAMA president, and I'd like to thank you for watching. Today, we will be discussing work which is currently on view in the main gallery at the Torrance Art Museum in a show called Studio System, an Experimental Residency Project. The Studio System Project is a unique attempt to bridge the gap between artistic practice and the public. First held in 2015, Studio System seeks to bring the dynamism of the artist studio into the museum space, encouraging audiences to not only see works as they are in progress, but to interact with the artist to discuss inspiration, sources, thoughts, feelings, content, and context, as well as chart the progression of the works over the month-long period that the project encompasses. This project is on view through this Saturday, June 29th, and culminates in a closing reception Saturday night from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. at the museum. It's open to the public, and we invite you to attend. The museum is located at 3320 Civic Center Drive in Torrance, California, and is open Tuesday through Saturday from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Admission is free, and donations are gratefully accepted. This discussion is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel with all of our previous TAMA Talks. You can access it from our website, www.tamadvocates.com. Joining us today is Studio System resident artist, Ashton Phillips. Ashton is an interdisciplinary artist based in Los Angeles, California, working directly with the earth, water, pollution, and more than human agents of disrepair as primary materials and collaborators. He is interested in the transness of material, the plasticity of bodies, both human and non-human, and the promise of queer ecological practice, including interspecies collaboration, experimental play, and speculative unmaking as pathways for making meaning, building resiliency, and generating new forms of knowing, feeling, being in the late Capitalocene. He holds an MFA in studio art from the Maryland Institute College of Art, where he developed an experimental, research-driven practice focused on the material, affective, and queer aesthetic powers of non-human agents, including fungi, mealworms, and sunflowers. He holds a JD from the George Washington University Law School, where he focused on law and economics as interwoven systems of power that reproduce ecological and human trauma, and a BA from the University of Maryland, where he studied archaeology and queer theory, serving as the first openly trans president of the university's LGBT Student Caucus. So Ashton, thank you so much. We are thrilled to have you here to discuss your work. Coolly placed outside on the patio of the Torrance Art Museum. So when people come to the reception, we want to make sure they head out to the patio to find you.
Thank you so much, G. I'm really excited to be able to share the work with you here while it's up and alive and growing, and with all of your viewers.
One of the cool things about this particular TAMA talk is that we're going to try and bring you live to the location of where this is taking place.
Okay, so what we're going to do is do a walking tour of this installation in the courtyard here at the Torrance Art Museum. This project was proposed as a post-human garden or a post-plastic garden. And if you look here, we have, this is sort of it's a cycle, so there is really no beginning or end, but this sculpture, this like living sculpture here, is what makes this garden plastic, what makes it post-human, and what makes it different from any cactus garden you might come across in a museum or park. So here in front of us are stacked three living containers with the mealworms themselves. And so this work is about the plasticity of matter. And I've been working with these mealworm insects for about uh, 4 years, 3 or 4 years now. I'm interested in them, and I'm working with them because they are the only creatures or process known to humanity with the power to metabolize this styrofoam material into biodegradable components. So they're stacked here, thinking about an altar, thinking about a triptych, and they're available for people to kind of meet. Like, I think of my practice a lot as relational, as about creating opportunities for us to interact differently with these non-human creatures and confront maybe our own feelings of disgust or abject or dirt or filth, and think differently about what it is that's really filthy in the world right now, or what it is that's really dirty in the world right now. What is it that's really precious? And think differently about things like trash and waste. So these creatures are here, and they are eating and metabolizing this styrofoam live as a kind of performance. They're also mic'd. So we have sound equipment in here. We have like these microphones in here that are picking up some of the sounds that they're eating, and this is going through and into this technology. These are called exciters. So they actually take the sound of the insects and vibrate this material, which is styrofoam, so that we can hear this kind of like symphony of metamorphosis. I don't know if you'll be able to pick it up on the phone, but
No, but what if you come to the museum, you can hear it, yes?
Yes, definitely. And so I work with sound a lot. Here it's, like I said, kind of referencing a triptych, and it's being projected out into this courtyard. The sounds that you're hearing include live sounds of the insects eating the material, as well as field recordings of water from sites where this styrofoam has been gathered, and the sounds of plastic itself. So then we have this garden here. The soil in these planters, or you could think of them as in these sort of sculptures, is I think of also as a sculpture. The soil has been gathered from a couple of different sites around LA. One being just outside of my studio in Hawthorne. 5 years ago, I gathered some soil that was not capable of supporting life. It was notable to me that it was exposed on the asphalt, but no plants were growing in it. I had it tested, and it came back that it was contaminated with heavy metals and other pollutants associated with a history of industrial exploitation, which made sense given the history of the site. But this actually made me more curious about the material, and really started me on this whole journey of working with non-human collaborators that are able to metabolize human pollution, which I think of as a sort of metaphor for like larger forms of human trauma and healing. Mm-hmm. So this dirt has been partially healed as part of this durational material process. And one of the ways that it has been made more capable of supporting life is through the addition of the mealworm insects' frass, their waste, and their exoskeletons, which contain calcium and nitrogen. So in a way, this dirt really is post-plastic. It has these nutrients in it that can feed these plants that were once part of the styrofoam. I'm also thinking of this like very much as sculpture and kind of as painting. So the styrofoam is stacked here, referencing columns, referencing the monuments. But instead of being marble or geological strata, it is strata of plastic. And this is the first time I've done this, but I think it's pretty, like, I'm pleased with the like affective impact of it. I layered the styrofoam in this tank and put the dirt on top, thinking about these representations of geological strata and geological time that we often see, where the first layer is has dino fossils in it, or there's a layer where from a previous time, millions of years ago, when the land was covered in water, and you go through, and then you get to the top layer and you see the Anthropocene with the plastic, and then this often is the end of the story. And I think in part because I'm a parent, but maybe I just have this like stubborn human drive to survive and think critically about like not give up. um I'm also interested in what happens after that. I think there can be a temptation to a kind of like fatalism about the future, and this, I'm not interested in suggesting a romantic sort of catch-all fix, or suggesting that these insects will sort of like save humanity from our um, ecological doom. Because they only eat styrofoam. They eat it really slow. There are many like complex factors that are contributing to the sickness of the planet and humanity. But I do think that it's important to me to like slow down and notice that there are creatures, that non-human creatures, and also maybe humans, that have the ability to adapt and respond and evolve and change and like live with this trauma that is happening. The plastic, the styrofoam becomes a metaphor in that way for like different kinds of damage that have happened to the land, that have happened to our bodies, and our ability not to cover up, not to erase
Mm-hmm.
that this garden is built on a foundation of plastic.
Mm-hmm.
Not to pretend that that we can make it pristine and clean somehow, but to see that we can have life and change that can grow even on top of that.
Yeah, kind of coexisting, but not. Yeah.
Yeah. So these tanks, I like made them again thinking of the geological strata, but then also thinking about like the Acropolis, like this sort of like form of the temple, this like rectilinear temple where we hold sort of effigies of gods, or we hold the things that we want to. It's a way of suggesting what we want to worship, or what we think should be worshipped
Mm-hmm.
on these kind of like layers of rock or a pedestal. So I don't want it to be too didactic, but I do think like I am interested in what we currently worship and what that says about us. And I do think that like the ability of this little sunflower plant to grow in this soil and extract pollution out of this dirt, pollution that humanity put there, is pretty miraculous.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like referencing that history of the monument or even the temple, and then that's kind of carried through the rest of the exhibition. I know the shadows are really strong here, and I have some images in the slideshow that might show this work better. But I started to think about, you mentioned in my bio that I had studied archaeology in undergrad. Like I've been on archaeological digs, and I've been to these, sites where there are ruins of a previous time. And I'm really interested in the way this material, after the insects eat it, it starts to pass as marble or stone.
Mm-hmm. And is that like from like the desiccated bodies and their waste?
Kind of. It's so like, here's a good example. So these holes, right? See those? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
These holes are here. This was a solid piece of styrofoam when it became part of this work. So the holes have been eaten into it by the mealworms. And then I add egg tempera paint onto the material, which I do for like lots of different reasons. But one is that it's a way of teaching the insects that the styrofoam is food. It also, they really like the sort of taste and smell of egg yolk. It also makes their eating marks legible to the viewer. So it's a way of like really inviting them into this role of like drawing, or like making their kind of carving more legible to us. but I think it also ultimately makes it this material pass as
Yeah.
as stone, or sometimes even like marble.
Yeah, it's remarkable considering it was. Do you have examples of the styrofoam that you started with as a comparison?
Yeah. So like this piece that's on the bottom here has
Yes.
not been meaningfully consumed. So you can see it just looks like regular new white styrofoam.
Mhm.
This one does a really good job at suggesting that this is a column, but like a little inside fact that's kind of delightful is that this was originally um, constructed to hold a toilet.
Oh, how ironic. Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. It's just amazing, the whole thing. Yes, show us this. I have some slides of this. And so,
Okay, great. Yeah. I'll move back to my chair so we can look at the slides in just a second. These are
no rush.
I'm getting excited. These are these little new growth on the cacti. So over here, um, we have all of these cacti that I've found around my new studio space at Angel's Gate, which was once a military base. There's a lot of cacti and a lot of pavement.
Yeah.
And part of this practice is going around and finding these pieces of cacti that have been like jettisoned off the body of the parent cactus,
Mm-hmm.
usually in response to stress. And then taking them, if this falls on asphalt, it will not come back to life, but it will not like become a new plant. But if I go and gather it and bring it into this sculpture, into this kind of material fold, then it can. And so here I'm mixing them with the styrofoam rubble, or the styrofoam, thinking of it as rubble. And again, like a kind of speculative archaeological site.
Mm-hmm. And so you're saying at the beginning of Studio System, back at the beginning of the month, this was, and the slides will show, this was just a bit, you started all of this from scratch, as it were.
Yes, there was a lot of material moving in and out through these gates,
Yeah.
like coming in. I had the dirt in this big tarp for a long period of time, because the dirt is also alive. So wanting to keep it like wet, and keep the fungi that have been added into it happy. But yeah, it's been a really great experience because my work really does kind of unfold in time. Let's see if I can switch back to myself here. And so it doesn't have an end.
So I was saying that we were talking about, remembering what this courtyard looked like at the beginning of the month, and the sort of experience of bringing all of this material in and all of the transformations that have happened. And I was saying that this residency is a really good fit for my work because my work doesn't really have an end. It's really about metamorphosis and the changeability of matter. And so being able to show it as this living, growing, evolving thing that is in process, and also being able to be here for a lot of the exhibition, and therefore sort of like facilitate these encounters between um not just me, but like more importantly, like me and these insects, or me and these plants and the visitors, has been, really beautiful. And like really like the highest form, from my perspective, like the highest form of my practice is a version that allows like me to be there and facilitating these engagements, and like giving people the opportunity to be curious about what's happening here, to like sort of feel their like discomfort and then kind of push through that a little bit, and like often get to a place of one, like a sort of childlike place of wonder or joy or playfulness, around something that can kind of feel a little bit prankster, like it's not every day that you get to like bring thousands of bugs into an art museum.
Right. Right. It's fantastic. I love it. I love it. All right. Well, let's do this then. We will go ahead and I will screen share. Fingers crossed. Who knows how this is going to work, but let's see. Okay. So you're seeing an early iteration perhaps of your work, correct?
Yes.
The setup, yes. Let me minimize this and see, hopefully. Well, we'll see how it comes out. You're either going to be in it or not. So I will edit
Either
out,
way, it's-
edit this part out, and we'll see how it goes. So, okay. So pick up here with the slideshow
Sure.
and we'll kind of
Sure.
guide folks through and again, you know, the wasn't a problem, but as I pulled them off the Google Drive and put them on my desktop, my machine just automatically sorted them in numerical order. So I tried to bunch as many together as I could, but we might be all over the map. So we'll see.
Okay. Thank you so much for doing that.
Yeah,
I
we'll
know
see
there's like
how it-
a lot of images, so
Oh, it's fine. I was just
keep
giving you a
trying,
hard
yeah.
time. It's actually totally fine. And I was super into it. And so this is going to be, it's amazing for me. So I love it.
Good.
All right.
Okay, great. So yes, this is an image from earlier on in the residency when I had first brought the cacti and some of these cacti pads. So here you can see how they look when I gather them. They're just these, and you know, not everyone is going to be watching this from LA. If you are, you're probably familiar with like this plant and its ability to do this and the way it kind of like breaks its body apart and forms new bodies. Like I will say there is something trans in the cactus for me and the way that it just sort of decides it doesn't need this body part anymore. And it just like lets it go that I find sort of delightful. But then
Mhm.
there's also like a poetic in the ability of that part that has been kind of dismissed to then continue its own life and build its own new body out of this like broken piece of its former self. So you can see that here visually. And some of these little pads have sprouted this month, um, which we might have been able to see a little bit when I was doing the cell phone kind of walkthrough.
Mhm.
You can also see the containers that some of the older cacti arrived in. So I've actually been keeping some of these bigger cacti for about 3 years, and I did show them in a previous iteration, or like a previous exhibition at the Cerritos College Art Gallery. So there's like something about the time scale of this work that feels more than human, and like there's a lot of content in that, like as artists, but in general, living in this you know like late capitalism. There's a way that there's a kind of pressure to go fast. There's so many images, constantly scrolling, constantly like this sense of forced um scarcity. I mean, sometimes scarcity is real, but there's also this kind of like apparatus of yeah, apparatus that's like help like encouraging us to think about to feel like everything is scarce and to compete with one another.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so I think that like the time scale of the cacti, the way that it takes 3 years for them to grow, is also content that like I'm interested in and I'm interested in sharing with others.
Absolutely. All right. Let's navigate through.
Okay, so here you can see me working on this sculpture back here. I don't think we spent a lot of time with that, but as I started to think of this as a sort of speculative future, like an imaginary archaeological site that you might come across in hundreds of years or thousands of years, where the rubble that you encounter, the ruins that you encounter are made of styrofoam or plastic rather than stone. I started to think about not just the monument, not just the temple, not just like the rubble, but also statuary. I know this doesn't really look like statuary, but the footprint of it is pretty like referential of the footprint of a sort of figure. And so what this sculpture is made out of is pieces of this styrofoam that have been partially eaten by the mealworms, but they continue to hold their kind of rectilinear shape, mostly. Like the way that the insects eat and decompose the styrofoam material, they don't like carve away a corner. Just eat these holes until it becomes lacier and lacier and just sort of falls apart.
Yeah, like Swiss.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, totally. So here I was thinking about, I was using mud, like a mud plaster that is made out of this dirt that I've been keeping and sort of like helping transform for 5 years. And so a mud plaster that's sort of operating like meat or tissue, and then this raw wool and plaster combo that I like started working with years ago before I was working with the dirt, but feels very like animal, very bodily to me. And so when you take it and like wrap these rectilinear objects up in this wool, it really starts to look like tendons or the sort of musculature that might hold, your shoulder blade to your spine. So it's not meant as like a representation of a particular body, but I am thinking about the ways that bodies are held together and the ways that bodies fall apart. And this sort of speculative body as being made of both this synthetic material, this like, material we think of as so synthetic, of styrofoam, and dirt and wool and plaster.
Yeah, so that inorganic and organic combined.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Is this the time lapse? Maybe.
It may be. Hold on a second. Let me see.
Oh yeah. Okay. So this is me putting the dirt over the styrofoam. We like spent some time with this sculpture as it is now. But I just and then now I'm planting the plants in there. It was even for me, like I think a lot about I like have some criticality about yeah um our drive to separate everything and our drive to like defend this idea of the synthetic or the fake as totally separate from the real or the organic or the natural. So I think I have like a lot of criticism about that, but even for me, like putting that dirt on the styrofoam was like a little hard. It's like so I felt like a real moment and I wanted to capture it with the time lapse. But I'm like happy with how it came out as sculpture. But
Yeah.
that's what we're seeing there.
Okay.
Me farming.
I think this is the.
Oh yeah. Yeah. This is me sharing that mud. Yeah, this mud plaster. Exactly. This is me making the sculpture that we saw a minute ago.
Yeah.
And really like kind of playing, like kind of allowing myself to make sculptures out of mud and like bring mud into the art museum and like hold this sort of dirty material up to viewers and ask them to see the beauty and possibilities in it that I see.
Yeah. So this is the mud that you have made.
Yes.
And you brought that in. Is this the mud that has the wool?
The wool I'm mixing in with the plaster, but it could have some wool in there. It's really like I was saying earlier, it's like I think of it as a sculpture, as like a living sculpture, and it has a lot of materials from a lot of generations of me working with it and trying like thinking about how to make it more capable of supporting life. So it has municipal mulch from the Long Beach, which is mulch is really good for soil. If you want to build soil out of contaminated dirt that is inert, mulch is good because you were saying you're a biologist, you have a biology background. A lot of the fungi that eat pollution, also their main food is wood. Like they do well living in wood. And so this is about 50% mulch to allow the fungi to have like additional food sources that will support them as they eat the heavy metals out of the initial source material.
Wow. How do you keep it from not drying out when you use it in a construction aspect?
It's gonna dry out in that context. I'm
Oh.
like allowing it to like move on from its living, its status as part of this living body of soil and become this sort of tissue that's holding this sculptural tissue that's holding together
Yes.
these pieces of styrofoam.
A little sacrifice. Yeah. All right. So this is the this looks like a several we how much time has passed since, is this sort of the end, toward the end?
I mean, we've made it some distance. We're not quite to the end yet with the cactus garden, but here you can see I'm like bringing out these pieces of styrofoam that have been partially eaten and covered in wax, and using them to kind of position the cacti, which kind of like I got this question. We did this group crits, which were really fun with the other artists here, and I got this question from one of the artists, like, you talk a lot about the body, where is the figure? And I was like, well, you're the figure, when you're here and you're holding the mealworm, or you're like a lot of people have helped me water these cacti this month, which has been really beautiful to watch. And sometimes these exciters, the sound exciters I was showing you earlier, sometimes I make those available for the viewers to actually put on their skull,
Oh, wow.
to vibrate their skull, which then becomes this sort of amplifier. But so there's lots of like ways that I'm thinking about the viewer's body as the figure versus just the viewer's eyes,
Yeah.
but also these cacti are totally figures, they're totally bodies.
Mhm.
And so positioning them with this rubble, they start to take on kind of gestures and personalities. And this shows me playing around with that some.
Interesting. And just another view.
Right. And then this is further along, and you can see this sort of foundation of a statuary in the background, and then the cactus garden in like full sun.
Yeah, it's a great spot for it out on the out on
Yeah.
the patio. I'm glad you've had some sunny days. When I was there in May, there were few.
Yeah, this is okay. This is me then starting like another sculpture, which is I've iterated on a little bit, but here I'm thinking about the styrofoam as a form, like a foundation, organizing it in a way on the ground in a linear way, and then like in with right angles. Thinking about how I lived in New Mexico for 3 years before we moved to LA. So there, going and visiting the ruins of different indigenous sites, in Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon. There's circular foundations, but there are also linear foundations. And then, as I said, as an archaeologist, I did a dig in Annapolis when I was, 20 years old, and it was hot in the summer, and very formative and like really fun. But a lot of what you end up digging up are just these sort of lines of build. There's not, full buildings, sort of Pompeii that's submerged in ash, and where you have the full building is really the exception. Um, and so that's what you're seeing there.
Okay. A little more developed.
Yeah, and then it's more developed here, and I added the dirt, so that it looks like this kind of foundation coming out of an earthen ground. Um, and then I also did that. That's like a move I also did in a recent solo show, and I think suggesting it's like another way of getting this synthetic material in contact with this organic material, but also suggests growth for me. Like what comes out of the soil, what grows out of the soil. And I love the possibility of seeing this as a building in the making. Like when it vibrates between saying, okay, this is a ruin of some civilization, like maybe our civilization now in the future. Or possibly this is the beginning of a new building or the beginning of a new community where people are learning how to build with what's been left behind.
Yeah, it's dystopian, but not. I mean,
Right,
it's the reality.
exactly.
We're looking right at it. So I love
Yeah,
this
there's
picture.
oh, thank you. These are my kids. I've watered the garden with other kids too and adults, but I you know, I think that I mentioned them earlier, like being a parent feels like it holds me accountable to the future in a way. Like I have a sort of curiosity about it and a sort of optimism about it that, or I guess maybe I want to have an optimism about it, that didn't feel as important before. And so they, you know, being like an artist parent, you're like often your kids are around a lot. And you like you're thinking about them with the work in terms of the content, but you're also thinking about just in how it's made. Like the best, like it doesn't always work out perfectly, but when you find modalities where they can participate and like contribute their energy and their curiosity to it, it can be um you know, really beautiful both like as like personally and creatively.
Yes.
So I'm teaching them all the time through this practice, you know, teaching them about what a cactus is, what pollution is, what a mealworm is, showing them how even this gnarly cactus that looks totally dead can come back to life with some care. I mean, and also not just human care, you know, like learning to notice these little bugs that, you know, like these little roly-poly bugs that live in the I I have here, I have here. This is a different kind of compost. I don't know if you can see it, but this is um this is like a vermicompost with the red wrigglers that
Here,
other
hold on.
people.
Hold on. Let's do it this way.
You have it. Okay.
Just pull, I just stopped sharing. So just to hold it
Sure.
up.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So I have here, this is a enclosure I built with this purple vinyl and then some transparent panels you can kind of see.
Mhm.
And it has inside of it um a different kind of compost, but this is like your more traditional vermicompost. See if I can show you.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, so this is just like a small sample from our family worm composting that we keep at home for our I'm gonna try to show you. Let's see. Can we see it? Oh yeah,
Oh,
so here we have
yeah.
our,
Worms. Yes.
yeah, these are like your traditional red regular worm.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, so you know, they help me take care of this and they're like really used to being around um these creatures. And I was saying to one of the other artists that I think there's something too about the way that kids they're gonna like destroy whatever you're doing, kind of, you know, like you're gonna knock over, like if you have, I have a memory of my son being in the studio with me when he was, you know, 3, and I had this bucket of paint that I had done a mural project, and so I had all of these buckets of paint left over, and I had them around, and he like knocked one over, and there's just this huge lake of house paint, you know, all over the floor, and then I just threw a drop cloth down, and we like paint skated. We like painted with our feet,
Mhm.
just sort of like ice skating through house paint. And it became this like really fun, kind of cool painting. But you know, I think it again doesn't always work out, but like it helps me remember not to be precious about what I'm making,
Sure.
because it's not just kids, but in general, like things aren't stable.
Right. 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 So this is at the top of the soil that you were talking about earlier.
This is one of the potatoes coming to life.
Mm, watering.
Here we are watering. This
Yeah.
is the sprout. So this was something I didn't expect, but has been really fun this month. In the cactus garden, there's this compost I showed you. And so I don't know what seeds are in there, but I'm just throwing apples in there or whatever, like you do. And then I'm taking the worm castings from that. And that's one of the things I'm adding to the soil to make it to help heal it. And so by having it out here and watering it regularly, we had all of these little sprouts come to life. But this area in the sun with the cacti is not conducive to a baby vegetable plant like that. So I all month I've been kind of gathering them and then transplanting them over to these other tanks which have more shade and water. So this is a picture of me doing this with my daughter.
Wonderful.
Now she's watering. These are the cacti when I harvested them from Angel's Gate. You can see the asphalt that was their previous home. Oops.
Wow. Yeah, you really can see that sort of strata of the layers that you've put on there. Is this what you just shared with us?
Yes, and this is, I'm sure, going to be a better image for people to see, but that gives you you can see this like egg carton and dirt on the side. That's fine. We can keep going.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm pointing at it with my finger. Is this that? Okay.
Yeah, there's like visibly egg carton, and then like there's a piece of a coconut, the husk in there.
Yeah. That's yeah, actually a great thing to add to compost.
Coconut husk.
Yes. It's the basis of
Yeah.
a lot of composting toilets.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think putting it here, and I am thinking about the materials, the colors, like how it's held together. I do think this is kind of that if we can go back to that last image for just a second.
Sure.
Yeah, this is, I think, an example of how I think of my sculpture as plastic bodies. So like one of my first, I think maybe my first semester in grad school, I sketched out like this soft sculpture of vinyl and imagining it, filling it with compost, with living insects and having holes in it. And it seemed like a crazy idea at the time, but I was interested in the way, the sort of like the formal art object, which are like often made of synthetic materials, and sort of sexy in this way that they're performing a kind of cleanness that doesn't really exist in the world, and then stuffing it full of worms, um, and thinking about not just human bodies, but definitely including human bodies and the way we have this sort of like surface performance happening. But ultimately inside we're like that, like there's all this interspecies digestion happening, like probably not literally worms, but a whole microbiome of metamorphosis and change.
Yeah. Yeah. Ah, okay. So
So
this is
here is, yes, one of our guests handling a mealworm delightedly.
Mhm. Oh, this is the sound. Okay.
Yeah, so I took the cell phone and just show that a little bit earlier, but this image might be better. So you can see that's a contact microphone, which picks up vibrations and translates them as sound. And you can see the material that's around it and some of the insects doing this work.
Mhm. Oh, I do. I see the mealworms.
Here we have one of the planters right towards closer to now. You can see like I also think of them a little bit as paintings. Like when you water them, this little like brown water drips come down, and roots have grown in a lot of them. So there's these fine lines, they're actually like pretty formally interesting. And then there's a way that they're constantly changing, so that makes them also like remain formally interesting for me.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, there you can start to see some of the like a root. And there's also like condensation happening. There's this I was telling Sune, who's one of the curators here, about this work that's Hans Hakke work. There's a condensation cube. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but there's like a plexi cube that's referencing minimalism and looks very um like well perfectly made. I saw it at the National Gallery of Art in DC, and
Mhm.
it is like sealed. But before it was sealed, a little bit of water was put into it, And so there's like this constantly shifting condensation on the surface of the object, depending on the time of day, and the like ambient heat. This sort of composition of the condensation on the surface of the cube shifts, which I was like so enchanted by. And this is, obviously very different in some ways, but there are some similarities with its like shifting material inside of this glass cube or this glass rectilinear form.
Well, I think what's interesting too is that it's always, it's changing. And so that's very, very cool. Although this image does have that painterly quality you were talking about. Okay. I might have put this in twice.
Yeah, keep going. It's fine.
Ah, growth.
Yes. So these little baby buds are new from when these cacti were here. And I did actually stop and spend a little time with those same buds a moment ago in our walkthrough, and they're already much bigger. Cacti often grow really slow, as I was saying earlier, but once they start to bud in the sun, they're like happy that bud will grow like surprisingly quickly. So for a time, like a 30-day exhibition, actually, you can see a lot of change.
Yeah, one of the benefits of coming when it first started and then continuing on as often as you can, even just a couple of times a week, it's really, really cool to see that progression. Potatoes, you said? Potato plants?
Yeah, there's potatoes, and then there's also these like volunteer plants from the compost that are probably like pumpkin and cucumber and things like that, that are just being born from food that we ate in my household and put into this vermicompost. And they did also add some sunflower seed. Sunflowers are a like very powerful phytoremediator, and I think one of the reasons, I don't know, there's like an aspect of sort of speculation. I often get asked this question of like, is this science? And I'm not sure that it matters to me whether I call it science or not, but there is a way that I know I'm generating knowledge that like I didn't have and might not, like this sort of eccentric knowledge, um, through like an embodied knowledge through this like iteratively being with all of these creatures. But I noticed that sunflowers and a lot of the other non-human life forms that can eat and metabolize pollution, they're like extremely resilient. They're extremely hardy. It's like made in the insect world, there's a lot of insects that can literally metamorphose and change form that can metabolize plastic. And I don't think that like science understands how or why, but there's definitely a transpoetic there for me that I'm like hopelessly interested in.
Yeah.
But the sunflower, when I lived in New Mexico, is also like this intense, like a cactus. It's like this intensely hardy plant.
Yes. Yes. This is a great pairing.
Yeah, thank you. This is a really beautiful interaction I just had the other day. And so sometimes people come and they don't have a lot to say, but they're really like quiet and listening, and like there's a sort of somberness, like tenderness. And so this guest was curious about the mealworms, and so I took her over to show them, and she asked if she could hold them. And so I let her, and she was really like calm, and I mean you can see, I think, in the image. And I asked her, how does it feel? Because like I don't always ask people that. I let them have their feelings, but there was a way that like her relationship, like what she was going through, felt like really beautiful to me. And she said it feels good, it feels peaceful.
Yes. Yes.
It was like
Once
so
I had
moving to me. Yeah.
tarantula, and that's what I remember feeling. It was just a very cool feeling of peacefulness. It was strange, but cool. All right. Great shot.
These are some more visitors spending time with the work.
Yeah, this probably should have been at the beginning. So this was sort of
Okay.
what your soil looked like before all that growth began. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. What was this piece?
So this is a painting from 2017, and I it's from a series I did for the New Mexico Cancer Center. Um, they have a program at this hospital in Albuquerque that I showed with a couple of times when I was living in New Mexico, where they bring in a bunch of artists and they give them basically the amount of wall space of a solo show, but it's all in the hospital, and it's not truly a solo show because there's a bunch of artists showing at the same time, but it's in this like active cancer hospital. And so I reached out to the curator and like basically was like, I would really like to show in the space. It was like because it was like almost exactly 10 years after I had lost my mom to cancer. And I don't mention that lightly or like to be too exploitative or melodramatic, but it really is this sort of like seed of this work.
Mhm.
So she grew up in Charleston, West Virginia, which is a place with a ton of pollution. Um, she was like her father, my grandfather, was a plastics chemist who worked in this plant where all of this like plastics technology was being developed and patented without really like any knowledge or care about the health consequences to the people working in that plant, the people living around that plant, the non-human life living in and around that plant. And so I've done like some of my research with this work has been about that site, that place, and the levels of carcinogenic materials that are in the soil and in the air and in the water related to that industry there, that the plastics industry, thinking specifically about my mom and her health and her body and what she went through. Um, so this painting was like one of 12 I did for that show, and it was it feels related to it feels formally related to this work to me.
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
yeah, which was somewhat surprising to me because it's been a while since I've looked at this. But I for that show I started working with a few new materials because I couldn't get what I'm thinking now is really grief through.
Right.
And so what is here, there is plaster and encaustic, plaster and beeswax, Tamara resin, oil paint, some oil pastel, maybe some charcoal. But I needed these layers of the substrate is wood. I needed that plaster which feels when it's on there by itself anyway, it feels like stone, it's chalky, it kind of comes through as bone sometimes. Um, for this like fluidity of the encaustic to read for me. And then I edited this one I worked on the longest of all of them, and I edited the sort of like positive form in the middle a lot. And I think now that it's like about it's like an embryo, it's some kind of body, it's some kind of form that is in a state of metamorphosis. Um and that was so yeah, so I just put it here on the table it in conversation with the rest of the work.
Yeah. I mean, I think particularly the plastic historical part of it is very, 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 very relevant.
This was another visitor and his dad, and they spent a lot of time with the work, lots of like curiosity, lots of questions. Like it's been really a joy to hear everyone's questions and their reactions to the work. There've been like several times where people start talking, and I feel like they are now the work. Like the things they're saying are so interesting and so poetic, and not something I would have thought of. And like it's been such a treat to be able to like witness that and facilitate that. But so this is a soft sculpture that I made this month for a show in Berlin that's also opening on Saturday. So we're treating this space as our studio. So I made it here. And for that, the gallerists were very excited about showing live mealworms in the gallery. The gallery is called Scotty in Berlin. It's an artist-run space. But they're like, can we ship mealworms through? I'm like, no, we can't. I don't think we can ship mealworms. That seems crazy.
Right.
But I believe that you also have mealworms
Yes.
where you live. Like there's something, there's like, and I like that the commonness of these creatures, like they work in a collective. You can't, it's not, there's no hero of this healing. They work slowly and they're like low everyday creatures that you can find most anywhere. But they can do this really magical thing. So I had to think through, okay, what kind of enclosure am I going to send to Berlin? And it's like not an aquarium, you know, like so I've worked in like other shows. It's not really here as much with this, the shape of the wormhole, you know, you might be able to see in some of the documentation, but the shapes that the worms make as they eat through this material, they can look a little bit like this Frankenthaler painting behind you.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Or like maybe like the shape actually in this painting we just looked at that I made in 2017.
Right.
This sort of biomorphic, irregular, yeah, shape. That's actually uncanny. I haven't thought about that before. That shape does look quite a bit like the wormholes that
Yeah.
they eat. So I've been taking those shapes that I find in actual pieces of the material and then making them, like drawing them or cutting them into fabric, scaling them up to human size, as if to suggest like you're a mealworm and this is the hole you have made through eating whatever toxic material has been put around you. Um, so this soft sculpture, you can't really tell from here, but the sort of like lobe irregular shape is referencing an actual hole. And so, yeah, and so there are live mealworms inside that soft sculpture, and these guys are kneeling down to like look and listen to them.
Outstanding. Oh, so you actually were able to use that microphone in here as well?
There's so many in that soft sculpture, and they're so happy. And the material on the surface here is a mesh that you don't even need to amplify them. Like you can hear them with the naked ear.
Wow. Okay. That is the true definition of interactive.
Right.
Oh, okay. This is a great example of the that material. So this was the styrofoam.
Yes.
Wow.
So when I was building this sort of foundation sculpture, I wanted to treat them like bricks, and I was like cutting them and editing them a little bit so that they would fit together like you would if you were building a wall of stone. So what you're seeing here is a piece of styrofoam that has been eaten by the mealworms and then covered by me with these wax and these this egg tempera for various reasons, but including being interested in making it look like stone. And so then this image shows you what happens when I use it like a hot wire tool to cut away, to like carve that piece of rubble so that it would fit with another piece. And it like really reveals its remaining styrofoam materiality.
Hmm.
This is a piece that has been almost totally consumed that I just pulled out of the tank.
And so what you're saying though is that within the month's time that you did this project, that is how much of the styrofoam that they have consumed.
Yes.
Wow. That's ecologically significant.
Okay, so this is a video that my collaborator and friend Eden Nudla set up when he came to visit the show right at the beginning. And so you're seeing a sort of like dirt eye view of me adding the frass to the dirt, to the cactus garden. So that like colored powder is actually the mealworm frass. So the mealworm's waste from that's being from these enclosures where they're eating the styrofoam. So I'm adding just like sowing. It's this like sowing the earth with this frass, which contains nitrogen, which it's mealworm frass is sold as a organic fertilizer in organic gardening shops, not usually from mealworms that have eaten styrofoam, but it's like an actual nutrient. So
Yeah.
that's what that video is.
And I think that's the end. So I will say that's the end of the slides, I should say. So I want to thank you so very much for joining us, because it is fascinating, number one, to see in action, what you're doing for Studio System. I have a couple of questions. So
Sure.
my main question, of course, if I were there and I was visiting you in the back, would be mealworms typically are food for other creatures. And
Right.
so how do you know then that the synthetic components of the polystyrene are not being passed on, kind of the whole PFAS thing, right? They're not being
Yes.
passed on to the consumer of that organism.
So, the short answer is that there are three main studies out of Stanford University that are like very famous and publicly available that I'm relying on in this work. The first one was in 2015, came out in 2015, and that was the study I found when I just Googled, is there anything that can metabolize styrofoam? I had been working with this contaminated dirt and fungi for a few years, and then moved to Long Beach and was like very suddenly surrounded by a lot of visible styrofoam pollution coming in from the sea. And I thought, I wonder if these fungi that I'm working with can also eat styrofoam. I mean, if they can eat arsenic, maybe they can eat styrofoam. And the answer was no, they can't. But like this mealworm can. Um, but that's something that science only really discovered in 2015, which is obviously very recently. And then at that same university, they've done a lot of follow-up research about it. And the first thing that the first major follow-up study was addressing whether the mealworms were injured themselves by eating the styrofoam, and it found that they were not. And then the next essay, it's not essay, sorry, I'm writing too many essays right now. The next study was about whether the mealworms could continue to be used as feeder insects, and it found that they could, although you do have to wean them for 7 days.
Off of the plastic?
Yes, because they're metabolizing it in their gut. So it takes 7 days for all of the styrofoam that they've eaten to be fully metabolized in their body.
I see. And then that becomes the, for lack of excrement, or what, tell me the
Yes.
word that you used.
It's
Frass?
frass. Frass.
Okay. And so then that, for me, it's just such a very interesting field, because, like that conservation of matter law, where, I can break it down to really, really small particles, but I really never can get rid of it. And so at what point does its, the minuscule particle of it no longer cause damage? And you seem to be saying that these studies support the fact that the mealworms themselves are really not harmed by what they're consuming.
That's right. And also, it's not quite the same as just breaking down the styrofoam into small particles of itself. Like any creature could, like that. Yeah, any creature could eat styrofoam and make it smaller. What they're doing is breaking down the molecule that is polystyrene into biodegradable components.
Ah, I see. So they're changing the actual molecular structure of the of the styrofoam,
Correct.
which is really the magic, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's I mean, that if we were able to focus our energies, and again, you spoke, we could talk for hours, I am sure, but you spoke to that idea about what we spend our time on. But if
Right.
we could spend our time on that, that idea that we could introduce a certain species to landfills, just as an example, to begin to break down some of those, things that we have introduced into our society to make life easier, but in actuality have harmed the earth in such dramatic and long-lasting ways. This kind of work that you're doing, I mean, I look at it from a very scientific perspective because I'm a science girl. So that's, I look at it as a way to combat a very ecologically, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like a hotbed of controversy now, right? This idea that, we've created all of these pollutants, and we have been doing so since, Eli Whitney and the cotton gin. So, that dawn of the industrial age has impacted the environment in such significant ways that I think this kind of work really, in addition to its artistic uniqueness at the TAM, I think has such far-reaching consequences. It's quite extraordinary.
Thank you. I think like I want to say one thing on that, which is there are scientists that are working to extract the technology that's inside these mealworm bodies, um, presently, to figure out a way to industrialize it. And like that would be beautiful. That would be really wonderful if we could scale up um what's happening here so that we could get rid of some of the styrofoam and like other plastic pollutants. But I think for me, like one there's something sort of deeper and harder to name about the work, which is about how we think about non-human life.
Yes, I was just I'm following your train of thought too. Like, at what point do I, stop sacrificing things that we think aren't, is that where you're going with it? The idea that, you start to create mealworms just to combat a problem that all we need to do is stop creating the polystyrene.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know if I was going there exactly, but like I'm definitely down to go there. I think there is something because it's like that's a way of thinking about the power dynamics between the human and non-human. And I'm mostly like I'm very interested in finding ways to think about like any kind of future, like resisting the like very overwhelming urge to feel very fatalistic about things, but without like jumping the fence into a sort of saccharine denialism either.
Sure.
Um, yeah, but I think also figuring out how to like honor a mealworm, that feels important. It's like an opening to a different way of being and interacting
Yeah,
that
it's a wormhole, is what it
yeah, totally. Yes.
it really is. When you said that earlier, that's kind of where my mind went, right? Because um, it is, you're right. I mean, it's a celebration of something that we find insignificant unless you're a gecko. So, well, thank you again. This was wonderful, and I really, really appreciate the time that you've taken to take us on our little journey. And this exhibition is opened through Saturday, so it'll be there at the museum out on the patio from 11 in the morning until 5 in the evening. And then on Saturday, the closing reception is from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. And of course, my question is, what happens after that? Will you just collect it all and take it with you, or do you have to dismantle it, or?
It's going to stay up at the museum for at least a week. And then I have a performance happening across town at a venue called Automata on July 12th, where I'm going to take some of this work and some of these sculptures and perform them with some of my sound artist collaborators. And then so that's a fun kind of like additional event that's coming up. And then the cactus garden will come back with me to my studio at Angels Gate in San Pedro. And I'm going to have, basically a semi-permanent installation outside of my studio, where I'll continue to care for and tend to these cacti. And then anyone that comes down can also see them.
Wonderful. Well, we encourage people to do so. So thank you again.
Thank you, Janine, so much.